There's a moment just before your eyes fully open, when the world hasn't asked anything of you yet. No bills, no emails, no version of yourself you have to perform. And in that moment, this morning, you reach for your phone the way you do every single day, and the number on the screen reads $650 million. It doesn't feel real. It rarely does. Not because the number is wrong, but because numbers that large stop behaving like money and start behaving like weather. Something enormous surrounding you that you've simply learned to live inside of. You could buy almost anything today. A private island off a coast nobody's heard of. A controlling stake in a company that employs thousands of people who will never know your name. A house so large it would need its own zip code. But you won't do any of that. Not because you can't, but because of a rule you made for yourself a long time ago. One that has shaped every decision since. Nobody can know. Not the neighbors who wave at you on your morning walk. Not most of your relatives. Not the people who call themselves your friends. Because the instant they know, the relationship changes shape permanently. And there's no version of going back once that happens. So you live like this. Quiet mornings, modest car, a closet full of clothes nobody would look at twice. And underneath all of it, more financial power than entire towns will accumulate across generations. This is the part almost nobody understands about extreme wealth until they're living inside it. The real prize was never the money itself. It was what the money could buy you that no price tag has ever listed. Total, uninterrupted invisibility. You step outside and the air's cool, ordinary, completely unaware of what just walked through it. A neighbor backs out of his driveway late for work, lifts 2 fingers off the steering wheel in a wave. You wave back. He's stressed about a meeting. You haven't been stressed about a meeting in years, not because you don't work. You do constantly. But because nothing left in your life depends on anyone else's approval anymore. He has absolutely no idea. To him, you're just the person 2 houses down who walks early and keeps his lawn tidy. Nothing more. Nothing less. And that gap, between what people assume and what's actually true, is where the entire psychology of invisible wealth lives. You pass the same coffee shop you've passed for years. The same barista calls out the same order before you even reach the counter. She knows your name, your usual drink, the fact that you tip well and never complain about the wait. She does not know, and will likely never know, that the company holding the lease on this very building quietly belongs several layers removed to you. There's something almost surreal about standing in a place you technically own, ordering coffee like anyone else, completely unrecognized by the person serving you. It isn't loneliness exactly. It's something closer to floating, present in the room, but somehow outside the version of reality everyone else is experiencing. This is the texture of invisible wealth that nobody captures in movies. It isn't dramatic. It isn't a tuxedo and a casino table. It's small, quiet moments like this one, repeated daily, where the truth of your life runs silently underneath the surface of every ordinary interaction you have. Here's what almost nobody realizes about that gap. It isn't a side effect of being rich. It's the entire point. Because the moment people know what you're worth, they stop seeing you and start seeing possibility. Possibility of a loan. Possibility of an investment. Possibility of being remembered in a will. You become, in their minds, less of a person and more of a resource. And once that shift happens in someone's head, it almost never shifts back. So you learn to watch for it before it happens. The cousin who reappears out of nowhere with sudden warmth in his voice. The college friend who slides into your messages, casual at first, working up to something specific. The relative at a holiday dinner who brings up family obligations while staring just a little too long, waiting to see if you'll bite. You start noticing these moments the way some people notice weather changing. A pressure shift in the air before the storm actually arrives. But the hardest part isn't the strangers trying to get close. It's the people you've known for decades, the ones who held a different expression on their face before they knew, and a slightly different one after. That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for you when this all began. The biggest surprise was discovering how quickly trust becomes the most expensive thing you own, far more valuable and far more fragile than the money itself. So you build protection quietly the way someone reinforces a foundation nobody will ever see from the street. Trusts instead of your name on a property deed, holding companies with initials instead of identities, a small, fiercely loyal legal team that exists specifically to have the conversations you'd rather not have yourself. None of this is about deception. People assume secrecy and dishonesty are the same thing, but they're not even close. This is about protecting something delicate in a world that has never learned how to be gentle with delicate things. There's a darker reason underneath the careful structuring, too. One most people never consider until it's explained to them directly. Visible fortunes attract more than envy. They attract risk. The kind that shows up as a stranger who knows a little too much about your schedule, or a message that feels friendly until it isn't. You've read enough quiet stories, the ones that never make headlines because the families involved made sure of it, to understand that privacy isn't paranoia. It's just pattern recognition, learned early enough to matter. So the anonymity isn't only about comfort or trust. Some of it is simpler than that. Some of it is survival, dressed up as discretion. You fly economy when you travel, not because the first-class seat is out of reach, but because private jets leave records, flight logs, manifests, fuel receipts, and records are exactly what you've spent years learning to avoid. You drive a car so unremarkable that nobody could describe it 5 minutes after seeing it pull away. Reliable. Forgettable. Exactly as intended. Meanwhile, the actual fortune moves somewhere else entirely, somewhere your name doesn't appear at all. It moves through entities with initials instead of identities, through investment vehicles that never carry your face publicly, through real estate where the deed lists a company, not a person. This is where quiet wealth becomes something closer to an art form than a financial strategy. You're not investing the way people on television invest. Loud bets, public predictions, interviews about your vision. You're investing the way water moves through rock, slowly, patiently, almost invisibly, until one day the entire landscape has changed and nobody noticed exactly when. You hold stakes in businesses whose employees have no idea who's behind the capital that pays them. You fund ideas you believe in without your name anywhere near the announcement. You let other people take the stage, the interviews, the magazine covers, while you remain the quiet architecture underneath all of it. Here's what almost nobody realizes about quiet investing once you've been doing it long enough. The absence of an audience changes the quality of your decisions entirely. When nobody's watching, you don't need to defend a prediction publicly, which means you're free to change your mind the moment new information arrives. Without ego, without embarrassment, without a headline to walk back. The investors who perform their conviction loudly are often the ones most trapped by it. You've learned that silence isn't just protection. It's a competitive advantage nobody talks about because the people who have it have no incentive to explain it to anyone else. You read filings late at night, alone, with no camera and no audience, because the version of investing that actually compounds wealth over decades looks nothing like the version that gets clicks. It looks like patience. It looks like discipline practiced in a room nobody else ever enters. And when you give money away, which happens more often than anyone close to you would ever guess. It happens without a plaque, without a press release, without your name attached to a single headline. Just a transfer that lands somewhere it's genuinely needed and disappears from your thoughts almost immediately afterward. The way a stone disappears beneath the surface of still water. Most people get this part of the story completely backward. They assume that hiding wealth comes from humility, from some moral discomfort with having so much while others have so little. It isn't that, or at least it isn't only that, it's something far more practical. It's the recognition that visibility comes with a bill you don't see coming until it's already been delivered. Attention invites requests. Requests invite resentment when they're declined. Resentment invites distance from people you never wanted to lose in the first place. So you remove the visibility entirely, and in doing so, you remove the entire chain of consequences before it ever starts. But here's what almost nobody warns you about going in. Buying that kind of freedom comes with its own quiet, complicated cost. You start watching people differently, almost without choosing to. A new connection walks into your life, and somewhere underneath the conversation, a quiet, automatic question starts running in the background. Do they want to know me, or do they want to know what I have? You can't switch that question off once it's installed. It runs beneath every introduction, every compliment, every offer of friendship for the rest of your life, whether you want it to or not. Dating becomes its own particular kind of exhausting. You can't casually explain why you're not anxious about rent, or why an unexpected expense doesn't register as a crisis the way it would for almost anyone else at the table. So, you simplify. You round down. You let people believe you're comfortable when comfortable doesn't begin to describe the actual distance between your life and theirs. There was someone once early on who almost found out by accident. A slip in conversation, a question about your job that got a little too specific. You watch yourself backpedal in real time, smiling, deflecting, steering the conversation somewhere safer, and you remember the strange grief of doing that to someone you actually liked. Not because you didn't trust her exactly, but because you'd watched what happened to people who told the truth too early, and you weren't willing to find out which version of that story would be yours. So the relationship stayed shallow in places it didn't need to, simply because depth required a truth you weren't ready to hand anyone yet. And somewhere in that shallowness, you lost something real, traded quietly for safety, and you've never been entirely sure it was the right trade. And somewhere in all that rounding down, without quite noticing when it started, you begin performing a smaller, safer version of yourself. One that fits more easily into rooms. One that doesn't make anyone feel the gap between your reality and their own. Then everything changes the moment you realize what that performance is actually costing you. Because the real isolation in extreme wealth isn't about being physically alone. You're rarely alone. Your calendar is full. Your phone never stops buzzing. The isolation is something quieter and far more corrosive. Being unknown by the very people standing closest to you, carrying something enormous that you can never fully set down in front of anyone. Not even the people who love you. There's a particular kind of loneliness in that. The loneliness of sitting at a dinner table surrounded by laughter, fully present, fully cared for, and still feeling like you're the only person in the room who knows the entire truth of your own life. That wasn't even the part that surprised you most. What surprised you most was discovering that money doesn't simplify decisions, it multiplies them. Every dollar under your control arrives attached to a choice. Every investment opportunity, every family request, every charitable appeal that finds its way to your inbox becomes a calculation running constantly in the background of your mind. Does this help? Does this expose me? Does this open a door I won't be able to close again once it's been opened? Most people assume that once you have enough money, stress simply disappears. What actually happens is the stress changes shape entirely. It stops being about survival, about rent, about emergencies, about whether the check will clear, and becomes something closer to permanent vigilance, a low hum running underneath everything you do, every single day for the rest of your life. You remember a specific night not long ago, sitting at your kitchen table at 1 in the morning? 3 separate decisions waiting for your signature by morning. A request from a sibling who needed help and didn't know how much you actually had to give. A wire transfer for an investment that needed to close before markets opened. A donation you'd promised quietly to a cause nobody outside your lawyer would ever know you supported. None of these decisions were difficult in the way a normal financial decision is difficult. You weren't worried about affording any of them. What kept you up was something subtler. The awareness that each choice adjusted the shape of your life slightly, opened a door slightly wider or closed it slightly further, and there was no one in the room to share that weight with. You signed all 3 before sunrise and went back to bed, and nobody who saw you the next morning had any idea what the night had actually cost you. And underneath that hum sits a fear that never fully leaves, no matter how many years pass or how carefully you've built your defenses. The fear of one detail slipping, one careless comment at the wrong dinner, one person connecting dots you spent years deliberately scattering across a dozen different entities, a dozen different conversations, a dozen different versions of the truth you've learned to tell. So you stay careful, even on the days you're exhausted by being careful, even on the nights some quiet part of you wishes, just once you could stop calculating long enough to simply exist out loud, without consequence, without strategy, without a single thought about what it might cost you tomorrow. But here's where the story turns, because something happens after enough years of building, protecting, and calculating that nobody fully prepares you for. You stop chasing more. Not because ambition disappears, it doesn't, but because you finally understand, with total clarity, what the yacht, the watch, and the gated estate were actually standing in for the entire time. They were never freedom. They were simply a louder, more expensive version of the same cage, dressed up with better views and a more impressive driveway. The real luxury, the one no magazine has ever photographed because it photographs as nothing at all, turns out to be far simpler than anyone prepares you for going in. It's waking up with absolutely nowhere you're required to be. It's spending an entire Saturday with the people who actually matter to you, without once thinking about your phone sitting silent in another room. It's walking into a grocery store wearing an old, faded hoodie, completely unnoticed, completely yourself, for the first time all week, maybe all month. It's privacy that has finally stopped being a strategy and simply become a way of life. It's peace that doesn't need defending against anything, because there's nothing left circling it. It's being loved by people who have absolutely no idea what you're worth on paper, because to them, it was never the point of view in the first place. And somehow that fact alone heals something the money never could. That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting at the end of all this. The biggest surprise was realizing that purpose, the real kind, has almost nothing to do with the size of your fortune at all. You found it instead in smaller places, in a conversation with someone who needed help and never learned where it came from, in a quiet Sunday with family that asked nothing of you except your attention, in the simple, almost forgotten pleasure of doing good work for its own sake, with no audience left to perform it for. Here's what almost nobody realizes until they've lived through every version of this story themselves. Most people spend their entire lives trying to look successful. The car, the watch, the carefully framed photo, the subtle flex disguised as a casual update. It's an exhausting performance repeated daily for an audience that mostly isn't paying attention anyway. The truly wealthy, the ones who've actually arrived somewhere real, spend their lives learning the opposite skill entirely. They learn how to look like nobody at all, how to disappear into a grocery store line, a quiet street, an ordinary Tuesday morning, without a single person suspecting what they're capable of. And that's the realization that catches almost everyone off guard the first time it lands. The richest person in any given room is rarely the one anyone would guess. More often, it's the person standing quietly near the back, dressed plainly, speaking little, completely unremarkable to look at. The one who has nothing left to prove to anyone because they've already proven everything they needed to, privately, to themselves, a long time ago. You think about all the versions of yourself this fortune could have built. The one with the wing of a museum named after him. The one whose face shows up at every gala, every ribbon cutting, every magazine spread about people who built something from nothing. That version was always available to you. You simply chose not to become him. And somewhere along the way, that choice became the most defining decision of your entire life. Quieter than any deal you ever closed and far more permanent. You think about that as you walk back up your own driveway, coffee long gone cold in your hand, your modest car sitting exactly where you left it, your neighbor's wave still hanging somewhere in your memory of the morning. Maybe the greatest luxury was never becoming rich in the first place. Maybe it's reaching the point after everything, the walls you built, the people you lost, the version of yourself you had to set aside, where you never have to prove that you are, where the number on the screen stops being something to announce and simply becomes something you carry quietly, the way some people carry peace and others carry purpose, and the lucky few learn how to carry both at once without anyone ever needing to know. If this changed the way you think about wealth, stay close. There are more stories like this one waiting, about money, about psychology, about the quiet rules shaping lives most of us will never see from the outside. Subscribe and we'll keep uncovering them together.